Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the most anticipated webinar of the year. I am Marissa Grindling, and I have the honor of being the Master of Ceremonies for the discussion today. I want to open the session and pay homage to the poet in our midst, Athol, and open the session with a poem of his. Listen to the madman as he implores us to take man, not as he is, but as he could be, with a spirit uncaged. And while you recage him and clear his mess, listen to the madman as he alone speaks with uncensored voice. These words invite us to pause and reflect.
Tia, you'll have to take the wheel. It looks like there's a technical glitch there.
No problem. Okay. All right. These words invite us to pause and reflect. Leadership, much like the voice of the madman, often disrupts comfort, challenges assumptions, and dares us to see beyond what it is, to imagine what could be. True leadership does not always speak in polished tones. Sometimes it unsettles, provokes, and even risks being misunderstood. As we open today's conversation on the risk of leadership, the leadership of risk, I invite you to listen with openness to the disruptive voices, the uncomfortable questions, and the possibilities that lie in leading with courage. For it is not only when we dare to hear uncensored voices, including our own, that we can begin to transform the way we address risk and shape resilience for the future. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our star-studded panel for today's session, though they hardly need any introduction. Firstly, we have Dr. Athol Williams, who is a lecturer in management at the Said Business School, University of Oxford, where he leads the Advanced Management and Leadership Program. His research focuses on strategic and ethical dimensions of self and organizational leadership. He holds a PhD from Oxford and degrees from Harvard, London Business School, MIT Sloan, LSE, and WITS. Secondly, we have Johan van Lochenberg, who is a tax practitioner, consultant, author, and former SARS Group executive for investigations. As a key whistleblower during the state capture era, he has testified at several commissions of inquiry. He is the author of 4 best-selling books, with a 5th on the way, and has received multiple awards for his contribution in public integrity. Thirdly, we have Rian Potgieter, a chartered accountant and compliance professional, is the CEO of the Compliance Institute of Southern Africa and chair of the International Federation of Compliance Association. With 27 years experience across banking, risk, audit, and compliance, she is a leading voice on the role of compliance as a strategic business partner and as a self-professed AI enthusiast, exploring its impact on governance and insurance. Lastly, we have Ms. Tiangele, who's a senior lecturer in public administration at Millpark Business School, where she leads the postgraduate diploma in public administration. She holds a master's in administration and is completing her PhD on aligning public sector curricula with workplace needs. As a passionate educator and researcher, she champions the transformative power of higher education.
Thank you so much, Thea. And to everyone, I do apologize. I hope you got at least most of this poem. I really apologize about that. Our internet just decided to cut out here. So guys, this distinguished panel will then bring tonight a wealth of insight, experience, and vision, promising a dynamic and thought-provoking discussion ahead. So I will start off with our first question, and I will ask Athol to maybe start us off with, what does it mean to lead effectively from your current position?
I think the challenge, Marissa, of leadership is, in the context of an organization, I think we always have two forces at least sort of driving us, or what we need to heed. On the one hand, there's the force of compliance. And I don't mean that in the way we think of risk and compliance. I think in the sense of complying with what is required of us, right? The moment we're in an organization or in society, there are norms about behavior, right? When I walk in the street and I spit on the ground, everyone will look at me, right? And sort of, give me a look that says that's not how we behave here, right? And so in organizations, there's this requirement that we play by the rules, that we, do what everyone's doing, that we go with the flow. And I think that comes up against our own sense of ambition, our own sense of right or wrong. And so I think effective leadership partly is managing this tension, because the idea of me leaving myself and who I am at the door doesn't make sense. But equally, going into an organization with rules and norms and processes and kind of saying, well, I'm just going to behave the way I want to behave, often is frowned upon. And so I think that's one. So for me, effective leadership, one aspect of it is being cognizant of this tension, finding a constructive way of managing it, knowing almost that you never get it right.
Definitely, definitely. Riani, what is your thoughts on leading, especially in your current position? How do you lead effectively?
Oh, so Athol, if you were in Singapore and you spit in the street, that would be a regulatory non-compliance.
Absolutely.
$500, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but I think back to the point. For me, yes, I do play a very specific role in my current position as CEO of a compliance institute. And yes, it is about, understanding what are the laws of the land. But Athol, I fully agree with you. I think one of the key challenges that we face in business, and for me, compliance is almost like the easy part. There's a law that says you must do X, Y, Z. If you don't do it, you're in trouble. That's like a very linear relationship. Do wrong, get the sanction. And I'm not talking about legally complex kind of laws. For that, you have a legal eagle that will assist you to understand that. But there's definitely this interplay between who am I in this organization and understanding then what is this organization's set of values. One of those values being we play by the rules of the land that we're operating in.
Yeah.
So in the current position I'm in, I do see myself as a leader in that perspective, but I also think one has to look wider than that as well. You are not just a person at work, you carry yourself wherever you go. So who is that person that comes into that organization? And you've made the point there, you sort of referred to it. I think it's quite difficult, and you're very lucky if you have a set of values that are very largely in alignment with what is required in that organization, and largely in alignment with the laws of the land. I'm not just complying because I have to, but actually it makes sense to me from an ethical and a values perspective. So I think, yes, that's sort of what I'll say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Johanna, I'll come to you next. Considering you wear so many hats, it's author and consultant and researcher and lecturer. What does it mean for you to lead effectively from where you are?
Yeah, well, the previous two speakers said pretty much it. I should just add, I'm also fulfilling a temporary role in government at the moment in an advisory capacity. I think in essence, if I can draw from what's already been said, it fundamentally for me, it stems from, and the core of it is the value system. And it's a combination of your own value system and the institution or organization or environment that you operate within. those two things need to be aligned. What that means, amongst other things, is that you are constantly putting in the effort because you want to understand the rules, the ethics, and the morality of that environment, institution, and organization. That's, I think, for starters. You have to constantly stay up to date with what are the rules here in the broadest sense of the word, not just law. And then secondly, I think something that maybe sometimes is not spoken of a lot is being able to empathize and sympathize. So within your daily interaction with other human beings is the real desire to understand and seek to align with, this value, this universe of values that I just spoke of.
Thank you so much. But I think a very clear distinction in leadership. Sorry, now I'm going to also take a time to say something, even though I'm the only supposed to ask the questions. But I think in leadership, it is also, to follow on what you said, there's a clear distinction that needs to also be drawn between empathy and sympathy. You cannot, you have to, almost want to say, you have to hold the space, but not put yourself in that person's shoes completely, because I almost want to say then you're also going to drown. So you have to make that distinction very clear. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the official format now. Thea, anything to add from where you are currently to lead effectively? Because I know you have this passion for students.
Yes, no, definitely. To add on to what every panel member has said, I think first thing we need to remember is that we are human. So before you are anything, you are a person with feelings, empathy, emotions. So from my end as a senior lecturer, I always have to say, okay, who am I? How do I lead myself? Before I can step into Millpark shoes, Millpark lecturer shoes, how do I want to lead myself? Because if I don't know how I see things, how will I expect my students to see things? So for example, I think leadership is it's situational. There's moments where you say, okay, I can work as a group. I can be democratic. Let's make decisions together. Because at the end of the day, as an institution, we are all moving parts. So we need one another as a process. But then you get issues where you have to make the final call to say, all right, I'm doing this because at this point in time, things need to be done. So I think as a leader, there's no process to it. There's no formula. If there was, I think we'd all be great. I want to say great leaders would all be outstanding. But unfortunately, it's one of those you learn day by day. Each day comes with a different way and different set of doing things.
Thank you so much, Thea. And for all my first year postgrad students that's here tonight, I know you're here because we have class just right after this. That is why we do personality testing in your first module. Because
100%.
if you do not know yourself, you cannot lead. Yes, there's one, I can see you. If you do not know yourself, you cannot lead. Anyway, I must stop lecturing and get back to the session. Okay, so when we do think about, if we can take the conversation back to a little bit more risk, if we think about the national risks we face, that was so beautifully put out in the IRMSA risk report, we often look at policymakers or senior executives, and yet risk is managed, mitigated, or even magnified at all levels of leadership. So from the boardroom to the classroom, every decision contributes to the country's resilience. So I think maybe, Thea, from a policy, a public administration standpoint, how can leaders at different levels then contribute to reducing the national risk exposure?
So I always like to say, skills are key in anything that we do. Skills development is so key. I wish we could, as a country, create a hub for skills development, just to always tap into it to say, this person is skilled at finance. This person is skilled at this. This is where I can actually go to tap in. But now we find ourselves faced with a conundrum where we find people in positions where they're not really trained or skills. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to see implementation. I always say we can have the best strategy, we can have the best thought processes, but at the end of the day, it's about what we do with what we have put on paper. So if we have the correct skills development, the right people in the right places, enhancing of workforces, I think that would help a lot in terms of the evolving of, leadership.
Yeah. Riani, I know this is something that I teach all the time, is South Africa has some of the best laws in the world. But like Thea said, it's not being implemented. So do you have any thoughts on how we can reduce the national risk exposure, how leaders can do that?
Going back to studies and risk management approaches and risk-based compliance, which is what we teach in from a compliance institute perspective. One of the key things that we teach and that we do as a methodology is to look at what are the root causes if there is a risk that's materializing or there's an issue, whatever. So I think we need to understand that even though we have fantastic intentions, very good laws, etc., all of this,
Is it just me that lost it?
It's for us as well.
Okay.
Perhaps should I cut in
Yes,
there?
thank you so much,
Marissa?
Ethel. Yeah.
I think so. So for me, from a business standpoint, thinking about risk, I think it's important to make the distinction between good risk and bad risk. If I can use very simple language, right? Businesses create value by taking risk, right? Setting up a new business, a new branch, introducing new products. Those are all risky ventures. Built into how we create value in businesses is to take commercial risks, to take strategic risk. I think, and same for a country, right? When we develop policies, when we support a particular policy in a country, there's elements of built-in risk. Things won't always go as planned. But I think that's the good risk. That's the risk that's built into the idea of creating something new. I think this risk we got to be concerned about is the risk that it's either illegal behavior or unethical behavior or risk that in many ways are externalities to what we normally do as in commercial activity or even as a nation. And I think that's the risk we've got to eliminate or minimize. I just want to make sure we don't also say we want to operate entirely in a risk-free environment, because business innovation, creation of value requires some of that risk.
Thank you so much. Sorry, Riani, we lost you there for a second, but Ethel took over.
I was just going to say, I think the root cause analysis is quite an important thing. And I'm, sort of really wondering at the moment, looking at something like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that's something I'm really starting to think about, is that if you're at your lowest level of that, where your basic needs are not in place yet, even the higher needs, the safety, the social needs and so on, if you haven't met those, I'm really wondering that even if you train these people, even if you give them all of these tools, that those basics need to be in place. And I'm thinking what's happening in South Africa, that a lot of our money and funds that are meant to provide that, those at the basic level, is just being dissipated by, corruption and all of these things. So I honestly believe that corruption is such a key thing. It's so pervasive and it's so insidious. And it's got such a far-reaching impact. It's not just beyond I'm stealing this money, or I'm corrupting somebody. It's money that's not going towards somebody's basic needs, and therefore we cannot get up the curve.
Well, Johan, since you are currently in government, how must the leadership evolve to meet these challenges that we are currently facing?
Yeah. Look, it's a very big question, and I think it requires different levels of of taking apart and understanding. There's the broader question or the broader element of the relationship between government and the lawmaking component of government in the broad term, and this notion of management by decree. So that's one element. You know, laws are made, and there's almost a built-in assumption that once those laws are promulgated and brought into being, that the majority of people will abide by those laws. And in the event that that does not happen, then there is a capability, capacity, and a will to respond to the non-compliance to the legislation. Particularly developing states struggle with that, because you can have the best laws in the world if you don't have capacity and capability to support those, you know, to regulate, administer, and enforce them. You're going to at some point create that moving middle in the normal distribution curve of, you know, what people want and you know how our leaders behave, and then we can behave like that too. And you know, it's a sort of mimicking, and the shift, the moving middle shifts towards the wrong side. That's at a high level, I think. But there's another aspect here, and I want to almost connect it to the previous question and some of the points made about being human, you know, the tension that exists between these things, and empathy and sympathy. You see, fundamentally for me, all of us are leaders in one way or another, whether it's at your household or among your friends, at the workplace, or wherever you go, you know, even in your smallest circle of interaction with human beings, your friends or whatever. If there isn't a sufficiently developed empathy and sympathy, then that idea of not going about in your daily goings on that would cause harm to society, or the not caring for others, or not caring for society or other people, or the consequences of your own action and so on, begins to dissipate, or they don't matter at all. And so no amount of legislation can cause human beings to be compliant if their value system is such that they don't care. The minute you care, the minute, you know, and smoking legislation is actually a good case study. There is no smoking police, and yet, you know, people will speak to other people who light up a cigarette in a public place. We almost police ourselves. It's one of the most effective laws ever. Yeah. And I don't know of anybody that's ever been fined or gone to jail, you know, in any significant way. And yet that law, and what's making that law work is not the existence of the law or anything like that. It's ourselves. And it's about, we don't want to be harmed. We care for our own health, or we care for the smell of a cigarette, or whatever the case might be. And I think so again, it's sort of at different levels at which you should approach you know, the considerations of the question you've posed.
Thank you so much, Johan. I did warn the panel that I do go off topic, so here goes the first one. I do apologize. In the chat, Imran said, in South Africa, is it true that risk leadership is not only about finance, compliance, or ESG? It is inherently socio-historical. Practically, I think because apartheid wasn't just a political system, it was a national risk event that shaped institutions' trust, power, relations, for generations. So when we talk about risk leadership in modern day constructs, we're really asking, how do we lead a system where that institutional memory is still pulling through? And I think that is so incredibly wise, because in my personal opinion, I'll throw to the panel now as definitely as well. In my personal opinion, risk management, like Johan also touched on, it is all about the people. it's, yes, you have your technology risks. Those will always be there. But the inherent risks that we will always face is about people. And all of that. Ethel, I mean, any thoughts on that comment that Imran made?
Well, I mean, so I agree with Johan's view about our values, how it's individual. I think Riani said it, and Thea also said it, that it comes down to us as individuals. But I think perhaps it's valuable in saying, well, what is our view of these individuals of which we speak, right? Because we make a big mistake when we assume everyone else is like me. Right. So, British philosopher, Thomas Hobbes said that, right, left to our own devices, all humans will destroy each other. We'd live short, brutish lives. And so is that our view of fellow humans? Right. Because if that's our view of fellow humans, if you look around and say, what's my view of that person? If my view of that person is, if given a chance, they're going to stab me in the back, I act very differently than if I say I fundamentally trust the people around me, or as Johan says, I fundamentally care about the people around me, right? So I think that's a useful view to start of saying, well, firstly, who am I, right? But also, how do I view others? And I often use the example around ethics when I'm teaching ethics that says, well, all of us would say we're ethical in that, I'm not out there to necessarily go and do harm to others. But very few of us step in when others are doing harm to others, right? And this is exactly the context within whistleblowers and witnesses sort of come to the fore, is they have seen others do harm. Now let's think about Johan's question about caring there, right? So I see someone mugging another person, and I say, well, hey, I didn't give the person the weapon. I didn't tell them to mug the person. If I get involved, I might get hurt. And hey, I'm late for my meeting, so let me just walk past and carry on, right? And I think that's a very rational thing to do, right? That's a very rational thing to say. That's not my responsibility because I've got my duties, I've got things to do, and I've got my own life to protect. So if I think I'll be in danger, then it makes sense for me to walk past. But the problem then comes in when everyone acts rationally and everyone walks past. That's when society collapses. And so I think that's what's happening in South Africa. So beyond our laws, beyond our history, right? Each of us, every time we decide to jump the red light because everyone else is jumping the red light, or to drive past the person lying in the street because everyone else is lying past, we perpetuate a system that says we don't care about the fellow person. And that just keeps getting worse and worse. And so for me, corruption and state capture was the ultimate pinnacle of this I don't care, right? I don't care about another person, so I'll steal, right? I don't care about the fact that resources are meant to go to schools and clinics, right? So I'll steal. I think our scourge of gender-based violence in South Africa is the same thing, right? I don't care. And so I think what Johan's saying and what we've been saying is very important to bring it back to my responsibility and my agency of saying, acting rationally, acting in my own interest rationally is not how we change society, right? Think of anyone who's done anything great in this world. It's actually when they act often against their own interest. So my challenge always to anyone who says, I want to act ethically or work for an ethical organization, I'm saying, what are you willing to give up, right? How will you temper your self-interest? Given that self-interest is ethically sound, but how will you temper your own self-interest to advance the betterment of others around you?
Thank you, Ethel. Thea, maybe any thoughts from you on how do we lead in a system where that we still have this institutional memory, privilege, and trauma that still shape the perceptions of risk and accountability?
So as I was nodding quite a lot at what Dr. Williams was saying, because it's how do we act rationally? Because we say we want to be, people with integrity and value, but at the end of the day, it comes down to self-interest. So where do we bridge the gap? Where do we bridge the gap of self-interest? How do I say what? So Dr. Ethel, what should I do in a situation where I'm seeing somebody is being hijacked? Do I just drive by? Because I always have to think, I'm a woman, it's dark, it's late, what has to happen? Do I stop and say, hey, stop? You know, so it kind of makes it very, 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 very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
If I can respond, and sorry,
Sure.
I'm breaking the flow of the
No,
session here.
let's go. This is where we need to go. Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I think, and you're right, that's the difficulty, but that's the sharp end. That's exactly where we need to focus on in terms of our moral dilemmas, right?
Correct.
Um,
Yes.
and so for me, I haven't got an answer to that, but I think step one is that it's a moral dilemma, right? Now, I will offer that for many people, actually, that isn't a moral dilemma. They're obviously just going to drive past, right? And I think that's where our society is collapsing. So for those of us who say, oh, it's a moral dilemma, what's the right thing to do? I think that's becoming a shrinking part of our population. Most are saying, not my business, let me move on, right? We know for every corrupt transaction in our country, there was a chief financial officer or some risk person who signed that off.
Of course. Because
Right?
we are all
how else
moving
did the money
parts.
go?
We are all moving
Yeah.
parts. Yeah.
Exactly. There was a banker somewhere who knew that transaction was illegal, but let it go, right? And so more and more, when people say to me there's a moral dilemma, I say, I want to hug you, thank you, right? Because at least you recognize that it's a moral dilemma.
Yeah.
When people kind of don't think twice about it, that's where we got to worry. But then back to the moral dilemma, I think this idea of self-preservation matters. So for me to say, I'm driving by, I see a hijack and I drive by, I think that's not morally problematic. I think there are different things we could do, right? Because in that case, Thea, you could drive and when it's safe, call the police, right?
Okay.
So not
Yes.
all of us will jump out of our cars and go and stop the hijacking. But I think there's always something we can do, right? You can go onto Facebook and say, hey, robbery on this corner. But it's not, for me, the worry is where we just drive by and turn the music up.
Yeah. If
Drive by,
I
hit the
can
bad
come
guys with
in,
your car. I don't know.
Marissa, if I can come
I
in
know,
on
I'm
that.
crazy. Yes, please.
Yeah. So and I think this is kind of in a sense the other speakers are saying what I'm trying to say better. You have to look at this almost as an inverse pyramid, where the sharp point at the bottom is the individual self. Almost when, the equivalent of being a baby. I can't think of any human being more selfish than a freshly born baby. That is how we are made. It's about pure survival in its most primitive form. As you progress up this pyramid into the wider part, sits the societal expectations and society in itself. And all along are these different connectors of rules, ethics, morals, what is acceptable, what's not, but also what is required by society and self. So for me, the whole fundamental question rests on how these interact. So Ethel's example of you see something wrong. It's not like you went looking for it. You come across something by accident. You see it's happening. You care. You also care for yourself. A rational person will navigate that risk. In other words, if it's a mugging, you're going to think, is this somebody I can take on or not? Do I have my phone with me? Can I call for help or shout or drive by and then call, or whatever the case might be? It's a thinking process. It's not but it's instinctive. And you combining your self-preservation with your care for others. And as you move along, you will comply with the laws of the land or the rules of society or the ethical code of your institution or whatever, because you know that it's for the better of all. There's almost a self-destructive cycle in if you take corruption or any form of risky behavior, and to use the example, bad risk. If you go and analyze any form of bad risk, and you cut it to the bone, it's going to be about a kind of selfishness where there's no ability to empathize or sympathize. I don't care for others, I only care for self.
This webinar went all the way from leadership to
But
the other way.
I'm back.
Yes.
Well, it's
I
the
am
same
back.
thing.
I've just joined from another device. It seems I've got a problem on my laptop, so I am here, just in case you can't see me.
No, we can. Thank you so much for coming
Okay.
back. I think I'm going to try and pull the webinar back a little bit to leadership, and let's see if we can put towards the end of the webinar, put a positive spin on it. So, Riani, I'll start with you. What leadership qualities do you think is most needed to drive meaningful change in today's risk landscape or compliance landscape, for that matter?
So I'm afraid I'm going to take you right back to the human values.
As long as you keep it positive.
Okay, well, let me start with the technical side. I as a compliance institute, and as the leader of that institute, from a leadership perspective, one of the key things that we do really impress upon our compliance officers and our leaders in the in the community is that you have to have. It's almost like a ticket to the game. Thought leadership is it's a non-negotiable. If you are a leader, you cannot be in your discipline and be the leader, the scene leader, and regarded as the leader, and not be that person that. I'm almost going to take a page out of the Occupational Health and Safety book here. They've got this term where they say you have to have situational awareness. So you've got to be not just focused on the job that you have to do. When you are in a leader position, you have to think about what's happening around me, what's happening in the industry, what's happening globally, what is happening in my discipline. So for me, almost like if you're a compliance officer, I'm not saying you must know all the laws. There are over 500 of them just in South Africa. But you have to know your stuff. You have to know your technical stuff long before, and then obviously all of these human values that Johannes just also mentioned. For me, it's very important from a leadership quality that there must be the humbleness. I think a lot of what we do today on leaders, especially in the business world and even in public sector, we make little demigods of them. The more aggressive they are and the more like type A personalities, whether be they male or female, those are the things that we value as a society. We go like, oh, this person is like really this A-type personality, this driver. And yes, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it has to be tempered with you are a human being, as all of us have said, and there's got to be, as a leader, that thing about an ethos where you're in it for the greater good. You have. I love this from the movie Spider-Man, and I don't think the quote originated in Spider-Man, but the uncle of Spider-Man said to him, "The more your power you have, the greater your responsibility." And I think it's that really is for me quite important. Is that you have to be that person that's got a lot of power. Therefore, you've got to be the better person.
Thank you so much.
What if we say why, Riani? If someone says
Yes.
why, right? So I went to school, I went to university, I work hard. I don't care about other people. I don't care about this ethics stuff. I just want to make lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with it?
I think it's, Athol, that goes back to what I said earlier. For me, the Maslow hierarchy is like I'm really, really thinking hard about all of this at the moment. I think you are in a very fortunate position and a privileged position if you have the luxury of living a principle-based life. It's easy to have principles when your food is on the table and there's something to drink in your glass. If it's not there, it becomes a much harder thing to do. So the why, I think I would always say, go through this, get up the curve, make as much money as you need to make to be comfortable. And I don't mean by that go and slit throats and all of that, but I do believe that it's part of getting up this curve. And to get to that point where we as a society can say, you know what, all of us, our basic needs are taken care of. Let's look at that next level. Let's now start to get each other to that point where we start to care about each other, care about how we do business, care about our environment, as another stakeholder. So, yeah, to your point, Athol, I think it's important. We have to have money. Money makes the world go round, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that question I challenged myself with as well, Riani, of, because other, there's a risk of making proclamations, right? We must care for each other. We must care for the environment. Sure, right? But how do we convince this world that doesn't seem to be caring about that? Right? There's a reason that's happened. There's historical reasons for it, right? We've got to this point now where our behavior is institutionalized, not in law, but in our behavior, right? So at the red light, we all are jumping the red light, even though the taxis might have started it, we are now all doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so fundamentally, Johan talked about cutting to the bone. When you cut to the bone of the issue, right? I don't care about anyone else. I care about my self-interest. It's me against the world. No one else coming to help me. And so let me jump the red light. And I think that's the question I haven't got a full answer for. Because I want to say to that guy, no, don't jump the red light. Be 5 seconds later than everyone else, right? Because your small step is going to have this ripple effect, and we will then change this country. But that might be argued as a very idealistic utopian view.
It is idealistic. I was thinking to myself as you're talking, and don't you find it ironic that when we speak about taxi drivers jumping the red lights, we go like, these bloody taxi drivers, look, they're jumping the red lights again. Yet when we do it, we can, we rationalize. We say, no, but I've got a good reason,
Yeah.
I'll stop
But
twice.
but
No.
But can I add, can you really say you don't care? So Ethel, you mentioned how people just want to make money and live satisfactory lives, but do you really think there are people who don't care? You must care about something, I feel. The society as a whole, there's something. I mean, we are all working people contributing to society in our own different ways. So can we really step back and say, I don't care about what I do. I don't care about there's some form, somewhere deep down inside of you. You have to feel something.
Yeah.
And the behavior of society as well.
Yeah. I always say I try not to project my concern, my behavior and concerns onto others. So I care deeply, but I'm not assuming others care deeply.
Sure.
And I think that's the difficulty, right? Because I think they should, but again, why should they? So they become circular. So my approach is, well, let me focus on me and what I can do, and behave in that way, hopefully as an exemplar that others might follow. But I can't know what others think. I can't know who am I to say how others should behave even, right? And I think that becomes part of our difficulty of, yes, they should care, but what if they don't?
Marissa, I think this is so important, this point that's beginning to emerge. You see, there is this strange irony that once upon a time, when the world's population was much smaller and when we were living in, sort of feudal environments or as smaller villages or whatever the case might be, the health and prosperity of the group guaranteed the health and prosperity of the individual. So if the individual behaved in a way to the advantage of the group, then the individual's, call it selfish needs, were taken care of. As the world became more and more complicated, and there all sorts of, it's a long debate why this happened, from property ownership to all sorts of countries forming and so forth, and disputes and what have you, and greed taking shape in the form of legitimate greed, by the way. All of that became far more complex. And I think that the science of risk management was a consequence of the complexity of society, because it's not that simple anymore. We don't live in a small little village where what I want and what my tribe wants or my village wants is one and the same. And if I do this, everybody's going to benefit. And if everybody benefits, then I will. But it doesn't take it away. You see, Ethel, in your question, why should it matter? Well, it shouldn't matter if you don't think it through, because in the short term, you may get your wealth or your money or whatever, and in doing so, you will cause harm. But you and I are living examples of how somebody did that in this country during the state capture era, and they no longer have a business presence in South Africa. They lost their reputation. They got such a bloody nose because they didn't care. Just imagine if they cared, and at the point in time when they were approached, they said, no, in the short term, I'm going to benefit, but in the long term, I'm going to harm people. So I'm not getting involved with this. In fact, I'm going to post on Facebook what you've just done. You know, if people can see the connection between that self-care and the virtue of selfishness, and how that plays into the bigger societal benefit, and in return, you get the reward. Yeah, it's like that. The apartheid question earlier on is precisely a case in point. A small number of people benefited at the cost of the majority, and now we're living with the mess precisely because those people didn't care. Now generations must pay the price. Thank you. Sorry, Marissa.
As a good master of ceremonies, I am going to be playing devil's advocate now. I was reading a book in this week, and one of the statements was, fear induces selfishness. We live in South Africa. I don't know about you, but I'm scared a lot. Could that be? I don't know.
I think it's an interesting point, Marissa. I guess so. You could say fear of what, right? And we always have this fear. We have this idea. So, for example, we have this idea of, the wealthy are okay. We the poor are suffering. I think the wealthy have got a lot to be afraid of. They build the highest walls and the strongest electric fences, right? Even they live in fear. I think equality is emancipation of the rich. Right, we talk about emancipation of the poor. I think we should save those poor, rich people of their fear they live in. So I agree with you. It's the same thing then with fear of the other. Right, a lot of the time we were inculcated with this idea of of the other. I think fear is a very powerful force. I think fear dominates far more than hatred. Often we think it's a hatred that's dominating. Right, I think it's fear of the other.
Fear, any thoughts? Fear causes selfishness.
Yeah, and with fear, you sometimes don't even realize how fearful you are. So, for example, you're just walking, but you're thinking twice. You always have to put mechanisms in place. I can't just walk here because what if this happens? What if this happens? So we're constantly creating scenarios, thinking of the worst. So yeah, it is one of those unfortunate things that we live with in South Africa. I mean, every day, for example, you get warnings to say, this is the new hijacking way of doing things. Be careful because this is the new trend. This is the new trend. So you always ask yourself, do I have to keep up with these trends? So now when I drive, I need to be careful because somebody might, there's a new trend now where you can't even put your laptop on sleep in the boot, for example, because there's these new devices where they can detect that there's a laptop or a device that is on. So they already know what car has which device inside. So I'm always thinking ahead. You always have to think ahead. Yeah. So yeah.
That's very, very risky risk. You must maybe come join our department. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's levels of fear. And I don't like to call it fear when we speak of compliance risk management or risk management. We call it risk management. But yeah, so I think there are levels of this. There's a healthy level, and I wouldn't call it fear then. It's about being aware, understanding the risks and managing those, responding to them, etc. But yeah, there's also this ultra fear. And I think it's at different levels as well. If I have psychological safety, that's also easier for me to stand my ground, to blow the whistle, to speak up, all of these things that we try to inculcate in corporates. We have the speak up culture. If that's the psychological safety is also another element, if you don't have that.
Yeah.
Marissa, I understand where that saying comes from. Instinctively, I get it. But I do think you need to break it down, because society is far more complicated than that. You know, there's something to be said about human behavior and consequence management, which in a way, you know, is a very close cousin of risk management. If we drive in a vehicle and we speed, and we see the traffic cop with that gadget, most people will slow down. And then as soon as they've passed it, they'll speed again, if there are people who speed. And that thing that makes them slow down is the fear of the consequence. You know, I'm going to get stopped by the cops, I might get locked up, or whatever the case might be. And then there are, of course, others who risk it. It's a bad risk. They drink and drive, or whatever the case. So there is something to be said about as evolved as we've become as human beings, there's still that part of us that's so elementary. And I should just end on that point by saying, I don't think all forms of selfishness are necessarily bad. I think inherently selfishness in its pure form is a survival instinct. The rule is, as my mom and gran taught me as a young boy, it's actually one of the first lessons that I can remember as a child, was, Johan, you can go and do anything you want, wherever you want. We don't care, as long as you don't harm anybody else or yourself. And that the consequences are not permanent. And it's really that simple, I think, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. If anyone has any questions, I don't think we're going to get to the pretty list that I was going to make about what leadership qualities are most needed. But if anyone has questions, I already have some that I will post to the panel now, but please post any questions that you might have to anyone here. So one of the first questions we have here is the hallmark of effective leadership the capacity to resolve crises or the foresight to build systems that prevent them? Riani, as a CEO, I think if you can maybe take that one for us.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, again, back to our discipline and our teachings, we have this concept of preventative and detective controls. So I think it's both. You want to have, you know, those systems that prevent it, and the system. There's a lot to be said about systems thinking. Obviously, I think that's another webinar, Marissa. Yeah, so definitely we need to think as holistically as possible. Obviously, I think it was Ethel or Tia that made the point, you cannot reduce risk to zero, then you won't be in business. But yeah, definitely understand the risks, understand the environment, and understand what you can do to prevent that from materializing. And then once they do, you know, how do I must have my resilience plans in place. I must have the detective controls in place. How do I actually know something has gone bad? How quickly can I react, and so on? Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. It's part of the control, the whole thinking around risk and control. You know, there are risks, and we have to have control systems and controls built in to manage those risks.
100%. And then back to the fear one. Someone posed the question. As a leader in any organization, how do you control and navigate this element of fear in employees or executives without compromising yourself ethically? I will leave that there. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Well, the use of the word control as a leader is something I wouldn't even start in a response there. I think as a leader, it's my responsibility to create the right environment in which everyone can thrive. And I think to obviously to Riani's point, also to have the controls in place. But I think fundamentally it's about creating the environment of trust, environment where people are inspired, where they find the work is meaningful. And that's what I as a leader want to do, to bring the best out of everyone else, to elevate them. I think that's what the role of a leader is in that context. I'm not dismissing the fact that some people will be living in fear, but I think rather than focus on saying, let me focus on that, I'd say create that right enabling environment.
Let me see, I see is there hands up? I can't see them. So I'll go back to the normal questions. Maybe one last one, and Thea, I'll start with you. How do we prepare people to lead? How do you teach that? Can you teach that? You're on mute.
I was just going to say, can you teach someone how to lead? So in one of our classes, we actually asked, are you born a leader or can you be taught? So there's always that argument between the two. A lot of people will say, no, but you can be taught, because sometimes you find yourself in a position where you have to soldier on and teach yourself how to lead. But others say, no, but it comes within how you've been brought up. And I think I've seen also in one of the comments to say, you know, your background also counts a lot in terms of how you've been raised, how your parents also teach you how to lead as well. So for me, how to lead, I don't have a concrete answer, but I say, at the end of the day, it comes down to you. And as Dr. Ethel has said, it's create the environment that you want. Because I also think you can lead without authority. So how you do things is how people see you doing things. So for example, if I publish and I'm at conferences and I enable my students to see what type of a person I am, and I create a sense of, let's say, mentorship as well. Lead by guiding, lead by showing. Don't just say, I'm a leader, I'm here, you listen to me, what I say goes. And at the end of the day, I think a leader is also there to learn. We're all learning from each other. So I keep saying we're all moving parts. So I always like to say to my students, I learn from you, you learn from me. I can provide the theory, you can bring the practice, we bridge the two together, and we integrate something very beautiful.
Ethel's thoughts on that, as you're also a lecturer?
Well, I think we can absolutely teach people to lead. I think in every function, every human function, we might have some innate ability, but we can always improve upon that, right? So, you know, there's no sports person who says, I was born a football player, I was born a high jumper. They might have been, right? But they spent many, many years getting training, getting coaching to perfect that and become masters at it. So if we are talking about effective leadership or good leadership or great leadership, I think practice is important. I think getting input and guidance is important. And I think being trained is important. I think these are skills that we can learn to be better at something we have innate. So in many ways, I agree with you that, you know, we can say, well, are we born or led? I think all of those traits in some ways we are born with. It's about mastering them that becomes relevant as a leader. And so that I think we can nurture, coach, train, and educate around.
100%. Riani, I'm going to close off soon. I see we're almost out of time. Any final words from your side?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marissa. I think just on that point about leadership, you know what, we're all operating from a certain assumption here, and that is that we all have the same value system, and that it's good to be, you know, on the positive side of the law. I think we can learn a lot in leadership from the criminal side. If you look at those leaders, some of them are like legends. They're historical figures. Al Capone, think about these names, right? What is it that they did and what makes them great leaders in their context? And I think we shouldn't just, you know, sort of have this idealistic way of thinking of about leaders. There are leaders, as Athol has said, across all spheres. And for me, the parting thought that I would like to leave people with is, you know, we have this thing that we often say, tone from the top. You know, that's an often people quote this thing. So tone from the top is very important. Mood in the middle. So if you can convey that to your middle managers, your next level of management will get you the right conduct in the corridors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Johan, we had a quick conversation the other day. And and I don't know, I've been seeing it as the cohort come through. But I think it needs to start before they get to university. So my question is, how do we actually prepare our children to lead one day?
Yeah. Well, you know, children are almost a captured audience because you know you catch them young, early, and open to acquire knowledge, understanding, skills, and values, and so forth. And in fact, it's your responsibility as a parent. Now, I accept society is so complicated now that there are some parents who don't have the luxury of doing that. But to the extent that you can, it's elementary things. And you know, values come from very early on in your life. And that's I go back to, you know, if you can get your kids to be genuinely, authentically empathetic and sympathetic and selfish, you're going to get a good balance there of people who will go out and want to make money for self and acquire wealth, but they won't harm society, and they'll get this thing that if we all comply by the rules, it's going to benefit all, and by benefiting all, it will benefit the individual.
Thank you so much. But to my panel members in today's session, thank you so very much for joining us. It was an absolute honor to have each and every one of you here. I apologize that we went off script, not that there was an incredibly set script, but I think it was really valuable, and I really, really enjoyed having you all here. I think if we can take anything out of today's session is that lead where you are, but it is not about anything. It is about taking action and doing things that will get us to lead and to change this country ultimately, because that was the whole idea of tonight's session. So thank you everyone for joining us, and good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.